In this video, we're going to talk about samples and populations. Often when we're talking about statistical questions, we have groups of data or groups of people that we're surveying or groups of items that we're counting that are way too large for us to count the entire set of items or weights or people that we're trying to determine a statistic for. In that case, we collect a sample of data. And the important part here is that we want our samples, it's a smaller subsection of our total population. We want our sample to be representative of our population. And we do that in a couple of different ways. So we could have a random sample. And in this case, we would just close our eyes and pick people or cars or dogs or whatever situations from the whole population. So we would literally just randomly choose a subset of the population. And so that decreases what we call bias. So we don't want to have biased samples. We want to reduce bias in our samples. And so just selecting at random, closing our eyes and choosing a subset of our population helps us to reduce the bias in our statistical analysis. However, random samples sometimes can have their own kind of bias, right? Because we don't have control over who we're picking from the group. We're just selecting randomly. So even with a random sample, we might not get a representation of the entire population. So a lot of times what we do is we have what are called representative samples. And so instead, for example, in this photo over here, the group of 3 people on the left here are a representation of the group on the right. Notice that we have, I'm guessing here, of course, I haven't met these people, but we have about 4 people in this group who identify as women. And we have 2 people in this group who identify as men. I could be wrong, but I'm just taking a guess here. And we could use another characteristic, right? We could have people who have long hair, people have short hair, different breeds of cats or dogs. And we want to represent all of those people or all of those animals in a particular category, right? Maybe we have blue-eyed people or brown-eyed people. Whatever the characteristic is that we think is going to influence our statistic, we want to represent that characteristic. And so in this case, we have 4 compared to 2. 4 compared to 2 in our population. And we want to have that same ratio. So that would be 2 compared to 1. And you'll see over here, we have 2 compared to 1 in our sample. And so that's all we're talking about, whether it's cats, dogs, trees, cars. We want to represent our population within our sample. So, and we may do this randomly. We may group all the blue-eyed people together and then randomly select people from the blue-eyed people. and then group all of the brown-eyed people together and randomly select a number of the brown-eyed people. That represents our overall sample, right? So it is important to have a random sample and a representative sample, again, because we want to reduce our bias. And we also want to we want our statistic to truthfully represent the entire population. All right, so that is a little bit. Sampling and populations is a very complex topic. We're only going to scratch the surface in this course, but this gives you a little taste of what we're dealing with in terms of sampling and populations.